Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over when everyone says it's too late. Nelda Virell knew that feeling deep in her bones. At 61, she stood before a rotting cabin in the Montana wilderness that hadn't seen life in decades. The roof was caving in. The walls were barely standing. Raccoons owned the place. Her children thought she'd lost her mind. Her brother said she wouldn't survive a month out here alone. But Nelda wasn't running away from anything. She was finally running towards something. For the first time in her life, she was choosing herself over everyone else's expectations. The land stretched wild and empty around her, and the work ahead seemed impossible. What makes a woman walk away from everything to rebuild a forgotten dream in complete isolation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Nelda had sat in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and broken promises. The judge's voice droned through the final divorce decree, but she barely heard the words. 35 years of marriage dissolved in less than 20 minutes. Roger sat on the opposite side with his lawyer, his face carved from stone, refusing to look at her. He'd always been good at that, at not seeing her. The wedding ring on her finger felt like it weighed 10 pounds. She'd worn it since she was 26 years old, back when she still believed that love meant compromise, and that compromise meant making herself smaller. Roger had been an architect, successful and confident, with strong opinions about everything from politics to where the furniture should go. She'd been a technical writer, good with words, but terrible at speaking up for herself. It seemed like a perfect match at the time. Their children sat behind Roger. David, 34, kept his eyes on his phone, uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. Sharon, 31, had been crying off and on throughout the hearing, dabbing at her eyes with tissue. She'd told Nelda a week ago that this was selfish, that she was destroying the family, that people their age didn't just throw away decades of history. The words had stung, because part of Nelda wondered if her daughter was right, but the larger part, the part that had been growing stronger over the past few years, knew the truth. The marriage hadn't been a partnership. It had been a long, slow, disappearing act where Nelda had faded into the wallpaper of Roger's life. He made the decisions. He chose their friends. He designed their house, literally designed it, without asking what she wanted. She'd learned to nod and smile and keep her thoughts to herself, because any disagreement meant days of cold silence. When the judge asked if there were any final matters to address, Nelda had stood and removed her wedding ring. She placed it on the table in front of her lawyer without a word. Roger finally looked at her then, his expression unreadable. She met his eyes for 3 seconds, then turned and walked out of the courtroom. Her brother Jim was waiting in the hallway, his face tight with disapproval. "You're making a mistake," he'd said. "Roger's a good provider. You're 61 years old, Nelda. What are you going to do now?" She hadn't answered him. She didn't have an answer yet, just a feeling like a fist unclenching in her chest. That night, alone in the temporary apartment she'd rented, Nelda had opened her laptop and started searching. She didn't know what she was looking for at first. She scrolled through travel websites, looked at classes she might take, even browsed job postings. Nothing felt right. Everything felt like just another version of the life she was trying to leave behind. Then she typed something different into the search bar. Remote property Montana. The listing appeared on the 3rd page of results. It was barely even a listing, just a few grainy photos, and a price that seemed too low to be real. Historic Rangers homestead, 40 acres, needs extensive renovation. The photos showed a cabin that looked like it had been losing a fight with gravity for the past 50 years. The roof sagged in the middle. One wall leaned inward at an alarming angle. The windows were either broken or missing entirely. Behind the cabin, mountains rose up into a sky so blue it looked fake. Nelda stared at that photo for 20 minutes. Something about the wreck of that building spoke to her. It was broken, yes, but it was still standing. It had bones. It had survived. She clicked on the real estate agent's number and made the call before she could talk herself out of it. The agent, A weathered man named Hank, who sounded like he'd smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years, had been blunt. "Ma'am, I'm required to show you the property if you want to see it, but I gotta be honest, it's not livable. Hasn't been occupied in maybe 30, 40 years. The roof's shot, the foundation's questionable, and you're 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. I've got other properties that might suit you better. I want to see this one," she'd said. The drive to Montana took her 3 days. She'd loaded her sedan with camping gear, basic tools, and supplies. David had called twice, asking her where she was going. She'd been vague. Sharon hadn't called at all. Jim had sent a text message that just said, "Don't do anything stupid." When she finally turned off the highway onto the dirt road that led to the property, her heart had started beating faster. The road, calling it a road was generous, was barely more than 2 ruts winding through pine forest. Her sedan bottomed out twice, scraping against rocks. After 3 miles, the trees opened up and there it was. The cabin sat in a clearing with mountains rising behind it like cathedral walls. Late afternoon sun painted everything gold. The building looked even worse in person than it had in the photos. The roof had a hole you could see sky through. The porch tilted at a 15-degree angle. Tall grass grew up through the floorboards. The smell hit her when she opened the car door. Decay and animal musk and something else, something old and forgotten. Hank pulled up in his truck a few minutes later. He got out shaking his head. "I know you drove a long way, but you can see it's not worth the trouble. Foundation's probably shot. You'd be better off bulldozing it and starting fresh." Nelda had walked up to the cabin slowly, testing each step on the porch before putting her weight on it. The door hung crooked on its hinges. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was a disaster. Leaves everywhere, evidence of animals, a musty smell that made her eyes water. But the walls were thick logs, hand-hewn, fitted together with skill. The stone fireplace still stood solid. Light came through the broken windows and the hole in the roof, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. She'd stood there in the ruin and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than that. Permission. "I'll take it," she'd said. Hank had tried to talk her out of it. He'd explained about the septic system that didn't exist, the well that was probably dry, the winter snows that could bury the place for months. She'd listened to all of it and signed the papers anyway. The price was so low that she could pay cash from her half of the divorce settlement. Roger got the house he'd designed. She got a wreck in the wilderness. It felt like the fairest trade she'd ever made. The day after closing, she'd driven back out with a truck full of supplies. She told David and Sharon she was taking some time away. Jim had left her a voicemail calling her insane. None of them knew where she was going. She told them she needed space, needed to think. That was true enough. Her first night in the cabin, she'd set up a camping cot in the corner that seemed structurally soundest. She'd hung a camping lantern from a nail in the wall. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, and she'd huddled in her sleeping bag, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the walls. Something, probably a raccoon, had scratched at the walls around midnight. She'd lain awake with a flashlight in one hand and a hammer in the other, her heart pounding. But when morning came and light spilled through the holes in the roof, painting stripes across the dirty floor, she'd felt that same quiet permission. This place was hers. Every broken board, every crumbling stone, every challenge, all of it belonged to her now. Not to Roger, not to her children's expectations or her brother's judgment. Just hers. She'd made coffee on a camping stove and sat on the tilted porch watching the sun climb over the mountains. The air tasted different here, clean and sharp and real. A bird she couldn't identify called from somewhere in the trees. The morning light turned the grass silver. "Okay," she'd said out loud to no one. "Let's see what I'm made of." The first week was assessment. She'd walked every inch of the property, taking notes, trying to figure out what needed to be done first. The list grew longer every day. The roof, the foundation, the windows, the door, the porch. Every single thing needed work. She'd never built anything in her life beyond following IKEA instructions. Roger had forbidden her from using his tools, said she'd hurt herself or break something expensive. She'd believed him because it was easier than fighting. Now she stood in the ruins with a hammer in her hand and no one to tell her what she couldn't do. The nights were the hardest. The silence out here was complete in a way she'd never experienced. No traffic sounds, no neighbor's television bleeding through the walls, no Rogers breathing beside her. Just wind and the settling of old wood and her own thoughts. She'd lie awake and wonder if everyone was right, if this was a midlife crisis or a nervous breakdown or just plain foolishness. She'd think about her warm bed in the house Roger got, about running water and electricity and heat that came from a thermostat instead of burning wood. But then morning would come again, and she'd be glad she stayed. On her 12th day at the cabin, Nelda decided to tackle the porch. It was dangerous in its current state. Boards so rotten they crumbled under her weight, nails rusted to nothing. She'd been stepping carefully around the worst sections, but sooner or later she'd forget and put her foot through into whatever lived underneath. She'd spent the morning pulling up the rotted boards, working slowly, learning as she went. The physical work felt good. Her muscles ached in ways they never had from typing at a computer. Her hands were developing calluses. She was getting stronger. Around noon, as she pried up a section near the cabin wall, her crowbar hit something solid. Not wood, not stone. She cleared away more debris and found a metal handle. Her heart started beating faster. She pulled harder, and a wooden box emerged from the hole beneath the porch, wrapped in what looked like oiled canvas. Nelda sat back on her heels and stared at it. The box was about the size of a loaf of bread, made of cedar, aged dark. She brushed away the dirt and carefully unwrapped the canvas. The box had a simple latch, no lock. Her hands were shaking slightly as she opened it. Inside, wrapped in more oiled cloth, was a stack of letters. The paper was yellowed but intact, the writing done in careful cursive with ink that had faded to brown. She lifted the first letter carefully. It was dated April 3rd, 1928. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "I am writing this to you, though I know you cannot read it, as you are gone these 3 years now. But the writing helps me feel less alone in this place." Nelda's breath caught. She looked at the signature at the bottom. "Your loving wife, Josephine Reed." She read the letter in its entirety, sitting there on the broken porch with the Montana sun warm on her back. Josephine wrote about her first week at the homestead, about her fear and determination. Her husband had died in 1925, and his family had wanted her to move back east, to live with them, to be taken care of. Instead, she'd used what little money he'd left her to buy this land and build this cabin. "They think me mad," Josephine had written. "Perhaps I am. But I would rather be mad and free than sane and suffocated." Nelda felt tears on her cheeks before she realized she was crying. She set the letter down carefully and picked up the next one. Then the next. There were dozens of them, spanning from April 1928 to September 1929. Josephine's handwriting changed over those months, started confident and clear, became shakier, more uncertain. The content changed too. These early letters were full of hope. Josephine described building the cabin with help from a local carpenter. She wrote about planting a garden, about the beauty of the mountains, about feeling truly herself for the first time in years. She was 43 years old. She'd spent her whole marriage being respectable and proper and quiet. Now she was learning to swing a hammer and chop wood and live by her own rhythm, but the later letters grew darker. Josephine wrote about the isolation, about going weeks without speaking to another person. She described the physical toll of the work, the way her hands bled and her back ached. She wrote about the voices in her head, not madness, but the constant chorus of everyone who told her she couldn't do this, shouldn't do this, would fail at this. "Some days I am not certain they were wrong," she wrote in July 1929. "The work is endless. Every task reveals 3 more. I'm so very tired, Margaret. So very alone." The final letter was dated September 15th, 1929. It was short. "I cannot do this anymore. I thought myself brave, but I was only running. Tomorrow I leave. I do not know where I will go. Perhaps back to Richmond, perhaps elsewhere. But I cannot stay. This place has broken something in me that I fear cannot be mended. I have failed you, my love. I've failed myself. Forgive me, Jay. Nelda sat for a long time after reading that last letter, the stack of papers resting in her lap. The sun moved across the sky. A hawk circled overhead, calling. She thought about Josephine packing her things, walking away from this cabin, carrying her failure like a weight. She thought about herself sitting here, almost a century later, doing the same impossible thing. Finally, she stood and carried the box inside. She set it on the makeshift table she'd fashioned from an old door and 2 sawhorses. She lit her camping lantern even though it was still daylight. She needed the light to feel less alone. That night, she went back out to the porch with her flashlight and examined the space where she'd found the box. There was nothing else hidden there, but as she was about to go back inside, she noticed something scratched into one of the support beams. She had to angle the light carefully to see it. J.R., 1928-1929. Josephine had marked this place. She'd claimed it, just like Nelda was trying to do. Nelda ran her fingers over the carved letters. "I won't leave," she said out loud. "I won't make the same mistake." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of doubt. The cabin seemed to loom larger in the darkness, all its damage more visible. The roof, with its gaping hole, the walls that leaned, the floor that sagged, the endless, impossible work that stretched ahead of her. She went inside and reread Josephine's letters by lamplight. She paid attention this time to the specific complaints, the specific fears. Josephine had been afraid of winter. She'd worried about running out of money. She'd been crushed by loneliness. But more than anything, she'd been defeated by other people's voices in her head, her late husband's family, her friends back east, the local townspeople who'd thought her crazy. Everyone told her she'd fail, Nelda said to the empty cabin. So she did. She pulled out the notebook she'd been using to track her progress and opened to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "Things Josephine got wrong." Then she started a list. She gave up too soon. She listened to the wrong voices. She thought being alone meant being lonely. She saw the work as endless instead of one step at a time. She forgot why she came here in the first place. Under that list, she started another. "Things I will do differently. Stay until it's done. Only listen to people who want me to succeed. Remember that alone is not the same as lonely. Take it one nail at a time. Never forget that I chose this." She underlined that last line twice. The next morning she went back to work on the porch with new determination. But the discovery of the letters had changed something. She wasn't just rebuilding a cabin anymore. She was finishing what Josephine had started. She was proving that it could be done, that a woman alone could take a broken place and make it whole, that she could take a broken life and make it whole. As she worked, she found herself talking to Josephine. "See, you don't pull the nail straight out. You work it back and forth. Learned that yesterday the hard way. Or, I think you'd like how the light comes in through the east window in the morning. I'm going to fix that one first." It felt less lonely somehow, knowing that another woman had stood in this exact spot, had touched these same walls, had fought the same fight, even if Josephine had lost in the end. By sunset, she'd removed all the rotted boards from the porch. Tomorrow, she'd start putting down new ones. It was progress. Slow, hard progress, but progress nonetheless. She made dinner on her camping stove, just rice and canned vegetables, nothing fancy, and sat on her cot, eating, while darkness gathered outside. The hole in the roof showed stars beginning to appear. She'd need to fix that before winter, but tonight it was almost beautiful. She pulled out Josephine's letters one more time and read through them again, committing certain passages to memory. Then she wrapped them carefully back in their oiled cloth and returned them to the cedar box. She would keep them safe. They were proof that someone had tried. And they were proof that Nelda was not the first woman to want something different, something her own, something true. She just needed to be the first one to finish. By the third week, Nelda had moved from the porch to what she considered a more serious problem, the foundation. She noticed that the cabin's northeast corner sat lower than the rest, causing the whole structure to lean slightly. After some research in the home repair books she'd brought, thick volumes from the 1970s she'd found at a used bookstore, She'd determined that the foundation posts had rotted through. The solution, according to the books, was to jack up that corner of the cabin, replace the rotted posts with new treated lumber, and lower it back down carefully. The books made it sound straightforward. The reality was terrifying. She'd driven into town, a 45-minute trip over rough roads, to buy the supplies she needed. The hardware store was small, dim, and smelled like sawdust and motor oil. The owner, a man in his 60s with a grey beard and suspicious eyes, had looked at her lumber order and raised his eyebrows. "Planning a project?" "Replacing some foundation posts," she'd said. "That's skilled work." "You hiring someone?" "Doing it myself." He'd studied her for a long moment. "Those posts are load-bearing. You jack up a building wrong, the whole thing can come down on you." "Then I'll be careful not to do it wrong." She'd loaded the lumber herself, refusing his half-hearted offer to help, and driven back to the cabin with her jaw tight. Everyone wanted to tell her what she couldn't do. Everyone wanted to explain the dangers, the impossibilities, the reasons to give up. She was getting tired of it. Back at the cabin, she'd spent an afternoon studying the foundation, measuring, planning. The book said to work slowly, to check and recheck everything. She set up her hydraulic jack, purchased used from an auto repair shop, and started the delicate process of lifting the corner an inch at a time. It took 3 days. Her back screamed. Her hands developed new blisters on top of old calluses. Twice she had to stop because she couldn't figure out the next step and needed to reread the instructions. But on the 3rd day, she slid the new treated post into place, secured it properly, and slowly lowered the jack. The cabin settled with a groan. She held her breath, waiting for catastrophe. Nothing happened. The corner held. The building was level. She sat down hard on the ground and started laughing. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. "Take that, Roger. Take that, Jim. Take that hardware store man with his doubts." That evening, as she was cooking dinner outside on her camp stove, she noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. She froze, her hand moving instinctively toward the hammer she kept nearby. A dog emerged from the tree line, or something that had once been a dog. It was thin, filthy, with matted fur and ribs showing. It stood about 30 feet away, watching her. "Hey there," Nelda said softly. The dog's ears pricked forward, but it didn't move closer. It didn't bark or whine or make any sound at all. Just watched. Nelda scooped some of her rice and beans onto a plate and set it on the ground, then backed away toward the cabin. "I'm going inside now. You can have that if you want." She watched from the window. The dog waited until she was fully inside before approaching cautiously. It sniffed the food, looked toward the cabin once more, then ate quickly, hungrily. When the plate was clean, the dog trotted back into the forest without a sound. "Silent type," Nelda said to herself. "I can respect that." The dog came back the next evening, and the evening after that. Nelda started setting aside portions of her meals. She never tried to get close or call the dog over. She just left the food and gave it space. On the 5th evening, instead of disappearing back into the trees, the dog circled the clearing 3 times and then lay down near the porch, about 15 feet from where Nelda sat. "You're welcome to stay," she told it. "But I'm not much for conversation, so you picked the right place." She started calling the dog Ghost, both because of its silent nature and the way it seemed to materialize out of nowhere. She had no idea if it was male or female, didn't know its age or breed or history. It didn't matter. Ghost was there, and that made the evenings feel less empty. One night her phone rang, a rare occurrence since the cell service was unreliable at best. She saw Sharon's name on the screen and almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. "Mom." Sharon's voice was tight, controlled. "Where are you?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm safe. That's not what I asked. David and I have been worried sick. You disappeared. You won't tell us where you are. Uncle Jim says you've lost your mind. Jim always thinks that about anyone who doesn't do exactly what he would do. This isn't funny, Mom. You just got divorced. You're alone. You're 61 years old. What if something happens to you?" Nelda looked around the cabin, at the camping lantern casting shadows on the log walls, at her tools scattered across the makeshift table, at Ghost lying just outside the door. "Something is happening to me," she said quietly. Something good. How can you say that? You left everything. You left us. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I didn't leave you, Sharon. I left a life that was making me smaller every day. There's a difference. You sound like you're in a cult or something. This is crazy. Dad thinks, I don't care what your father thinks. That's kind of the point. Silence on the other end. Then in a smaller voice, do you even care what I think? Nelda closed her eyes. Of course I do. But honey, I need you to understand something. For 35 years, I did what everyone else wanted. I was the wife Roger needed me to be. I was the mother you and David needed. I was the sister Jim expected. And somewhere in all that, I forgot how to be myself. I'm trying to remember now. Can you give me that? I just don't understand why you have to do it alone. Why you have to disappear. Because if I stayed close, if I stayed where everyone could reach me, I'd end up letting you all talk me out of it. And I can't let that happen. Sharon was crying now. Nelda could hear it in her breathing. What if you need help? What if you get hurt? Then I'll figure it out. Sharon, I know this is hard for you, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? A long pause. I'm trying. That's all I ask. Nelda looked out at Ghost, who was watching her through the open door. I'll call you next week. I promise. I love you. I love you too, Mom, even if I don't understand you. After Sharon hung up, Nelda sat in the darkness for a while. Ghost came closer, step by careful step, until it was sitting just inside the doorway. It still wouldn't let her touch it, but it was there, present. You understand, don't you? Nelda said to the dog, sometimes you have to leave to find your way home. Ghost's tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag, but close. That night, Nelda pulled out Josephine's letters again. She found the passage she was looking for, dated June 1928. My sister writes that I am selfish for choosing this life. She says I am running from responsibility. But she does not understand. I am running toward myself. Why is that selfish? Why must a woman's happiness always come last? Nelda copied the passage into her own notebook. Under it she wrote, it's not selfish, it's survival. The next morning, she started on the next foundation post. She had 3 more to replace, and then she could move on to the roof. One task at a time. One nail, one board, one day at a time. With Ghost keeping silent watch and Josephine's words for company, she was finding her rhythm, finding herself, and despite what everyone else thought, despite the endless work and the isolation and the fear that sometimes woke her at 3 in the morning, she was happy. At the 1-month mark, Nelda faced her biggest challenge yet, the roof. The hole had grown larger as weakened boards gave way to wind and weather. She couldn't put it off any longer. Winter was coming. She could feel it in the morning air, and a cabin without a roof was just expensive camping. She'd brought Roger's toolbox with her, not because she asked for it in the divorce. It had just been sitting in the garage, full of tools he never used. Roger bought the best of everything, and then hired people to do the actual work. The tools sat pristine in their custom foam cutouts, a display of capability without the messiness of actual use. Nelda remembered once, maybe 15 years ago, she'd wanted to build raised garden beds in the backyard. She'd asked Roger if she could use his tools. He'd looked at her like she'd suggested juggling chainsaws. You'll hurt yourself, he'd said, or break something expensive. Just hire someone. I'd like to learn. Nelda, be reasonable. These are professional-grade tools. They're not toys. She'd hired someone. The garden beds had been beautiful and sterile and built by someone else's hands. She'd never felt like they were truly hers. Now those pristine tools were getting dirty and scratched and used for their actual purpose. The irony pleased her. She'd spent 3 days studying roofing techniques in her books and watching videos on her laptop when she could get enough cell signal to load them. Roofing looked dangerous. Lots of ways to fall, to make mistakes that wouldn't show up until the first heavy rain. But she'd learned that most things looked impossible until you broke them down into smaller steps. Step 1. Remove the damaged sections. That took a full day of careful work, prying up old shingles and rotten wood, checking constantly to make sure she wasn't about to fall through. Ghost watched from below, tilting its head at the sounds of hammering above. Step 2. Sister, the damaged rafters. She had to bolt new lumber alongside the weakened beams to reinforce them. This required working at awkward angles and holding heavy boards over her head while trying to drill. Her arms shook with fatigue. Twice she had to climb down and rest because her muscles simply gave out, but she did it. By the end of day 2, the structure was sound. Step 3, new plywood sheathing. She'd had the hardware store cut the sheets to manageable sizes, but they were still heavy and unwieldy. Getting them up the ladder and positioned correctly while the wind tried to turn them into sails tested every bit of her. Patience and strength. The store owner, she'd learned his name was, Buck, had looked at her supply list and shaken his head. "You're really doing this yourself?" It wasn't a question, but she'd answered anyway. "I am. You know there are professionals, good roofers. This is dangerous work. I appreciate your concern." He'd rung up her order in silence, but as she was leaving, he'd called out, "Use a safety harness." "At least do that," she turned back. "I will. Thank you." It was a small moment of almost respect, and it had warmed something in her chest. Now, harnessed and careful, she nailed down the plywood sheets. The rhythmic hammering felt meditative. Strike, strike, strike. Each nail was progress. Each secured board was proof she could do this. On day 4, she started on the shingles. This was detailed work requiring precision and patience. Each shingle had to overlap correctly, had to be nailed in just the right spots. She worked slowly, checking and rechecking her measurements. Her hands cramped. Her knees ached from kneeling on the sloped roof. But she kept going. Ghost had started coming closer. Now the dog would eat from Nelda's hand, though still shying away from being touched. At night, Ghost slept on the porch just outside the door. Sometimes Nelda woke to the sound of the dog's breathing and felt absurdly grateful for the company. She was most of the way through the shingle installation when the storm rolled in. The mountains made weather unpredictable. She'd seen the clouds building all afternoon, but thought she had more time. She was wrong. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping her hair across her face. Then the rain came, not gradually, but all at once. Like someone had overturned a bucket, Nelda scrambled to secure her tools and cover the exposed sections with tarps, fighting the wind that tried to rip everything from her hands. Her feet slipped on the wet roof. For one terrible moment, she thought she was going to fall, but the safety harness caught her. She hung there, heart pounding, rain soaking through her clothes, and started laughing. Because she hadn't fallen. The harness worked. She was okay. She climbed down carefully and ran for the cabin. Inside, she could hear the rain drumming on the sections she'd completed. No leaks there, her work was holding. But the uncovered area leaked like a sieve. Water poured through, pooling on the floor, soaking the supplies she'd forgotten to move. She spent the next hour moving everything to the dry side of the cabin and setting out every container she had to catch the leaks. Ghost appeared at the door, soaked and shivering. For the first time, the dog came all the way inside without hesitation, leaving muddy paw prints across the floor. "Good choice," Nelda told Ghost. "No point being stoic when you're drowning." They sat together in the dry corner, listening to the storm. Nelda made instant coffee on her camp stove and wrapped herself in a sleeping bag. Ghost shook water everywhere, and then settled close to her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the dog's warmth. The storm raged through the night. Wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Rain hammered the roof, but the sections Nelda had repaired held firm. She checked obsessively, shining her flashlight up at the ceiling, looking for new leaks. There were none in the areas she'd finished. Her work was good. It was holding. Somewhere around midnight, Ghost moved closer and rested its head on her leg. Nelda froze, afraid to move and break the spell. Then slowly, carefully, she lowered her hand and touched the dog's matted fur. Ghost flinched but didn't pull away. Nelda stroked gently, feeling the dog's tension gradually ease. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." By morning the storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and bright. Nelda climbed back up to assess the damage. The tarps had held. Nothing crucial was ruined. She could continue. That afternoon her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, thank God. Sharon said you finally called her. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. She said you're somewhere remote. That you're working on some kind of project." Nelda smiled. I bought a cabin. I'm fixing it up. Silence. Then you bought a cabin? When? Where? Montana. About 6 weeks ago. Montana. He said it like she'd announced she was moving to Mars. Mom, that's really far. That's kind of the point. Another pause. Are you safe there? Are there people nearby if you need help? I'm learning to help myself. That's what this is about, David. I don't... He stopped, started again. I know the divorce was hard. I know Dad wasn't the easiest person. But this seems extreme. You're 61 years old. Everyone keeps reminding me of my age like it's a reason to stop living. That's not what I meant, isn't it? David, listen to me. I spent 35 years being what everyone needed me to be. I was a good wife to your father, even when being a good wife meant making myself invisible. I was a good mother to you and Sharon, even when that meant putting my own dreams on hold. And I don't regret those years, I really don't, but they're over now. This is my time. My turn to choose something for myself. She could hear him breathing on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. What are you choosing? To see what I'm capable of. To build something with my own hands. To stop being afraid. You were never afraid, Mom. I was always afraid. I just didn't let it show. He was quiet for a long moment. Sharon thinks you've lost it. Jim definitely does. But honestly, I think maybe you've found it. Whatever it is you were missing. Tears pricked her eyes. Thank you for saying that. Just promise me you'll be careful. And stay in touch. And Mom, yes, I'm proud of you. I should have said that first. After they hung up, Nelda sat on the porch with Ghost at her feet. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and purple. The dog's coat was starting to look better, less matted, more cared for. Her own hands were scarred and calloused, but strong. The roof above them was solid and whole. At least in the sections she'd completed, she had 3 more days of work ahead to finish the roofing job. Then she'd need to tackle the windows before the cold really set in. After that, the interior walls. Then the floor. The list never got shorter, it just changed. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't thinking about the end of the list. She was thinking about the next task, the next nail, the next small victory. She was learning to live in the moments instead of always racing toward some distant finish line. Ghost's tail thumped against the porch boards. The dog was starting to trust her, just like she was starting to trust herself. Tomorrow we finish this roof, she told Ghost. Then we celebrate with real food. Maybe I'll make a fire in the fireplace. See if the chimney still works. Ghost's ears perked up at her voice. Still didn't bark or whine, but the message was clear. I'm listening. I'm here. Yeah, Nelda said, scratching behind those pointed ears. Me too. 6 weeks into her time at the cabin, Nelda made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been working on the interior walls, pulling away sections of damaged wood to assess what could be saved and what needed replacement. Behind a loose board near the fireplace, she found another artifact from the cabin's past, a small, leather-bound book, its pages swollen with age and moisture, but still intact. It was a diary. Josephine's diary. Nelda carried it carefully to her makeshift table and opened it with trembling hands. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1928, several weeks before the earliest letter she'd found. Today I signed the papers, Josephine had written. The land is mine. Henry's brother called me foolish. His sister wept and said I was throwing my life away. But I feel lighter than I have in years. For the first time since Henry died, I can breathe. Nelda read through the diary slowly, carefully. Where the letters had been addressed to Josephine's dead wife Margaret, meant for an audience, even if only an imagined one, the diary was purely private. The handwriting was looser, more immediate. The thoughts raw. Josephine wrote about her marriage, how Henry had been a good man, but his family had been suffocating. After his death, they'd expected her to move in with them, to become their permanent guest, their project, their responsibility. The thought had terrified her more than living alone. They cannot understand, she'd written. To them, a woman alone is a woman incomplete. They see my independence as stubbornness, my desire for solitude as unnatural. But I was never so lonely as when I was surrounded by people who could not see me. Nelda felt those words in her chest. Yes, exactly yes. The diary contained details the letters had omitted. Josephine wrote about her own doubts, about nights when she'd cried so hard she'd made herself sick. She wrote about the physical toll, her hands bleeding, her back in constant pain, her body not built for this kind of labor. She wrote about the locals who'd thought her strange, who'd gossiped about the woman living alone in the mountains. But she also wrote about moments of pure joy, watching the sunrise from her porch, the satisfaction of driving a nail straight, the taste of water from her own well, small victories that felt enormous. The middle entries grew darker. Winter had come, and Josephine wasn't prepared. She'd run low on supplies. The isolation had begun to wear on her mental state. And then, in November 1928, something else appeared in the diary, something Josephine hadn't mentioned in her letters. Today, a man from the county office arrived. He says there is a question about my deed. The land was disputed, he tells me. Original owners were forcibly removed. He cannot say more, but his meaning was clear. They were Indians. This homestead was built on stolen land, and now someone is raising legal questions. Nelda stopped reading, her heart sinking. So that's what had happened. That's why Josephine had ultimately left. Not just loneliness or physical hardship, but a legal battle she couldn't afford to fight. The remaining entries detailed Josephine's anguish. She loved the land, but how could she fight for property that had been taken from its rightful owners? She'd consulted with a lawyer in town who told her the claim would likely fail. The removal had been decades earlier, the paperwork clean by current legal standards. But Josephine couldn't shake the moral weight. How can I stay here, she'd written in January 1929, knowing that my peace was bought with someone else's pain? Every tree, every stone, every sunset, all of it stained with injustice. I came here seeking freedom, but I have imprisoned myself in complicity. The final diary entry was longer than the rest. Written in September 1929, the same month as her last letter. I have decided to leave. Not because the law requires it, the claim was dismissed 2 months ago, but because I cannot bear the weight of this knowledge. Every morning I wake in this beautiful place and think about the family who woke here before me, who built this cabin with their own hands, who loved this land first and better than I ever could. My presence here is an erasure of their story. So I will go. Perhaps that is cowardice. Perhaps I should stay and fight for their memory, for justice, but I do not have that strength. I'm too tired and too broken. Forgive me, Margaret. Forgive me, whoever you were who built this place. I tried to be brave and found I was only selfish after all. Nelda closed the diary and sat in silence for a long time. Outside, Ghost was chasing something through the grass, a grasshopper or butterfly. The dog had gained weight, looked healthier, almost happy. The cabin around her was slowly transforming. She could see what it was becoming, a real home, solid and warm, and hers, except it wasn't hers. Not really. Just like it hadn't really been Josephine's. That evening, when she should have been working on the windows, Nelda sat on the porch and stared at the mountains. Her phone had signal for once, so she'd been able to do some research. The land had indeed been taken from a Native American family in the 1910s, part of a systematic removal that had cleared the area for white settlers. The original homestead had been built by that family. She was living in someone else's stolen home. The knowledge sat heavy in her stomach. She thought about the foundation posts she'd replaced. Those had been original, hand-hewn. She thought about the stone fireplace, carefully constructed. Someone had built this place with love and skill, and then been forced to leave it behind, just like Josephine had left it behind by choice. Unable to bear the weight of that history, a truck appeared on the dirt road, an unusual sight. Nelda stood suddenly wary. The truck pulled into the clearing and a man climbed out, tall, weathered, probably in his 60s. "Help you?" Nelda called. "You Nelda Virell?" "Who's asking?" He walked closer, hands visible, non-threatening. "Name's Jim Redfeather. He paused. My family used to own this land. Long time ago, Nelda's breath caught. I see. Got a letter from a lawyer. Said someone was living here again. Figured I'd come see for myself. They stood in silence for a moment, measuring each other. Finally, Nelda gestured to the porch. Would you like to sit down? Jim looked at the cabin, really looked at it. Something complicated crossed his face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. My grandmother was born here, in that cabin, 1892. I didn't know, Nelda said quietly. When I bought it, I didn't know the history. Most people don't want to know. I want to know now. 2 months into her time at the cabin, Nelda had learned something important. Building things wasn't just about following instructions. It was about problem solving, about seeing what needed to be done and figuring out how to do it. She stood in what used to be the bedroom, studying the window frame she'd built from scratch. It was beautiful. Hand-carved corners with a simple but elegant pattern she'd designed herself. She'd discovered she had an eye for this kind of work, a patience for detail she'd never known she possessed. Roger had always said she wasn't artistic, wasn't creative. Turned out he'd been wrong about that too. The conversation with Jim Redfeather kept replaying in her mind. He hadn't been angry, which had somehow made it worse. He'd just been sad, looking at the cabin his family had lost, seeing a stranger living in the home his grandmother had been born in. We tried to get it back, he told her. Back in the 70s, during the land rights movement, lawyers said we didn't have a case. Too much time had passed. Too many sales between then and now. That's not right, Nelda had said. No, it's not. But that's how it is. He'd left shortly after, refusing her offer of coffee but taking her phone number. She didn't know if he'd call, didn't know what would come of their meeting. But she couldn't unknow what she now knew. Couldn't unsee the history written in every log of this cabin. She needed supplies, which meant a trip to town. The drive was familiar now, though no less rough. She'd gotten better at navigating the ruts and rocks. Ghost came with her these days, riding in the passenger seat with its nose pressed to the window. At the hardware store, Buck greeted her with something that might have been a nod of respect. Mrs. Virell, what can I do for you today? Need glass panes for the windows. And more lumber. I'm working on the interior walls. He pulled out his order pad. You've been up there, 2 months now? About that. Building's still standing. Building's better than standing. It's almost livable. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll admit, I didn't think you'd last 2 weeks, you and everyone else. But you're doing real work up there. I can see it in what you're ordering. That's skilled carpentry, not just patching holes. I'm learning as I go. Well, he wrote down her order. You need any advice, you can ask. I won't charge for that part. It was as close to an apology as she was going to get, and she accepted it with grace. Thank you. I might take you up on that. While waiting for Buck to load her supplies, she wandered to the general store next door. It was small, dim, and crowded with everything from canned goods to fishing tackle. An older woman stood behind the counter, 70s maybe, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. Help you find something? Just looking. I'm Nelda Virell. I bought the old homestead up Mountain Creek Road. The woman's eyebrows rose. That wreck? I'm Fay Brenner. Been running this store for 40 years. You're the one Buck's been talking about. Am I? Says you're really fixing it up. Doing the work yourself. That's right. Fay studied her with open curiosity. It takes guts to tackle a project like that alone. I ran a ranch by myself for 30 years after my husband died. Everyone said I should sell, move to town. Take it easy. Easier to let other people tell you what you can't do than to prove them wrong. Nelda felt something unknot in her chest. Exactly. You run into any problems up there, you come find me. I know every contractor, plumber, and electrician in 3 counties. More importantly, I know which ones are honest and which ones will try to cheat a woman living alone. I appreciate that. Really. Fay waved a hand. Women like us have to look out for each other. Not many of us left who remember what it's like to be underestimated. They talked for 20 minutes. About the cabin, about the challenges of living remotely, about the satisfaction of doing things yourself. When Nelda finally left with her supplies, she felt lighter. Fay understood. Buck was coming around. She wasn't just the crazy woman in the mountains anymore. She was building something real, and people were starting to see it. That evening, her phone rang. Sharon's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, how are you?" "I'm good, honey. Really good." A pause. "Can we video call? I want to see where you are." Nelda hesitated, then switched to video. Sharon's face appeared, eyes red. She'd been crying. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Sharon's voice broke. "I told Brad I want a divorce." Nelda sat down slowly. "Oh, sweetheart, I know. I know you're probably thinking I told you so because I was so judgmental about you and Dad. I'm not thinking that at all." "What happened?" Sharon wiped her eyes. "Nothing dramatic. Nothing like Dad's affairs or his controlling behavior. He's fine. He's perfectly fine. And I'm miserable. I keep thinking about you, about how you said you felt invisible in your marriage. And I realize that's exactly how I feel. Like I'm playing a role in someone else's life instead of living my own. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you're not surprised. I wondered if maybe your marriage looked easier from the outside than it felt on the inside." Sharon looked around at whatever room Nelda was in. "Is that really where you're living? It looks like a construction site. It's getting there. Want the tour?" Nelda walked Sharon through the cabin via video call, showing her the roof repairs, the new foundation posts, the hand-carved window frame she'd just finished. Sharon was quiet throughout, and when Nelda finally returned to the porch, her daughter's face was thoughtful. "You built all that?" "I did. Mom, it's beautiful. It's still rough, but you made that with your own hands. I'm learning I can do more than I thought." "I need to learn that too." Sharon's voice was small. "Can I come visit?" "Not right away, but maybe in a few weeks. I don't know what I need. But I think being around you might help. You're always welcome here. Just know there's no running water yet, and you'll be sleeping on a camping cot." "I don't care about that." Sharon smiled through her tears. "You were right, Mom, about choosing yourself. About not being afraid. I'm terrified right now, but I think it's the right kind of terrified." After they hung up, Nelda sat on the porch with Ghost and watched the last light fade from the sky. The window frame leaned against the cabin wall, ready to be installed tomorrow. She'd carved a small detail into one corner, a rising sun. It felt appropriate. Everything about this place was about new beginnings. Jim Redfeather's visit still weighed on her mind, but tonight she let herself feel proud of what she'd accomplished. The cabin was transforming. Her relationship with her daughter was healing. She was discovering capabilities she'd never known she had. Tomorrow she'd install the window frame and continue working on the walls. Next week she'd tackle the floor. There was always more work, but that was okay. The work was the point. The transformation of the cabin, of herself, was happening one careful step at a time. Ghost leaned against her leg, warm and solid. The dog trusted her now completely. It was a small thing maybe, but it meant the world. The first real cold arrived in early October, 3 months after Nelda's arrival. She woke to frost on the inside of the windows and her breath visible in the cabin. Winter was coming, and she still had so much work to do. But the cabin had a roof now, and walls that held heat, and a fireplace that drew properly. She'd survive. She was installing the last of her hand-carved window frames when she heard a vehicle approaching. Ghost's ears perked up, but the dog didn't bark. Never did. They both watched as a silver sedan pulled into the clearing. A woman emerged, professional in a way that immediately marked her as someone from outside this world. Dark suit, heeled boots impractical for mountain roads, leather briefcase. Nelda climbed down from her ladder and wiped sawdust from her hands. "Can I help you?" "Nelda Virell?" The woman's voice was crisp, businesslike. "That's me. My name is Teresa Wolfe. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates out of Helena." She pulled a business card from her briefcase and held it out. "I'm here regarding the property you purchased. Everything in Nelda went cold." "What about it? Is there somewhere we can sit and talk?" "This is a somewhat complicated situation." They sat at Nelda's makeshift table inside the cabin. Teresa looked around with barely concealed surprise, taking in the camping equipment, the tools, the clear signs of ongoing renovation. Ghost sat at Nelda's feet, watchful. "Mrs. Virell, it's Ms. now, I'm divorced. Ms. Virell, I represent the descendants of the original owners of this property. The Redfeather family? Nelda nodded slowly. I met Jim Redfeather a few weeks ago. He told me his family's history with this land. Teresa's eyebrows rose slightly. Then you're aware that the property was forcibly seized from his family in 1914 during a period of systematic removals in this region. I've learned that, yes. It's not something that was disclosed during the sale. No, I imagine it wasn't. Teresa pulled a folder from her briefcase. The family has been working with our firm to investigate the legal status of several properties that were taken from their ancestors. This homestead is one of them. We've uncovered documentation that suggests significant irregularities in the original seizure and subsequent sales. What does that mean? It means your deed may not be valid. The chain of title is compromised. The world seemed to tilt. Nelda gripped the edge of the table. Are you telling me I don't own this property? I'm telling you there's a strong legal case that the Redfeather family has a superior claim to ownership. We're in the process of filing a quiet title action, essentially asking a court to determine who the rightful owner is. I bought this in good faith. I have a deed based on a fraudulent seizure from 1914. Ms. Virell, I understand this is difficult news, but my clients have been fighting for justice for over a century. Their family built this cabin with their own hands. They were forced off this land at gunpoint. Surely you can understand their position. Nelda stood and walked to the window she'd just installed, with the carved frame she'd made herself. How long do I have? The legal process will take time, but in the interest of fairness, my clients are offering you 90 days to vacate voluntarily. If you choose to fight this in court, you'll lose. I can almost guarantee that, and you'll be responsible for significant legal fees. It would be better for everyone if you simply walked away. Walked away? Nelda's voice was flat. From 3 months of work. From everything I've built here, I know you've made improvements to the property. The family is willing to discuss compensation for the materials you've purchased, though not for the labor. That was your choice to expend. Teresa stood and left a stack of documents on the table. You don't have to decide today. Look over the paperwork. Consult with your own attorney if you wish. But Ms. Virell, please understand, this land was stolen from the Redfeather family. All we're doing is trying to restore what's rightfully theirs. After Teresa left, Nelda sat at the table for a long time, staring at the legal documents without seeing them. Ghost whined softly and pressed against her leg. She ran her fingers through the dog's fur, mechanical, numb. This couldn't be happening. She'd lost her marriage, her home, 35 years of her life. She'd driven across 3 states to find this place. She'd worked herself to exhaustion rebuilding it board by board. She'd discovered strength she never knew she had. And now someone was telling her it had all been for nothing. No, not for nothing. For someone else. For a family that had lost their home a century ago. She thought about Josephine, who'd faced the same impossible choice. Josephine had learned about the questionable ownership and eventually left, unable to bear the moral weight. The lawyer had told her the claim wouldn't stand, but Josephine had walked away anyway. Had spent the rest of her life wondering if that made her a coward or a decent person. Nelda pulled out Josephine's diary and reread the relevant passages. Then she opened her laptop and started researching. She read about the 1914 removals, about the systematic theft of native lands across Montana and beyond. She read about families torn from their homes, about children sent to boarding schools to have their culture beaten out of them, about a deliberate campaign to erase an entire people's connection to the places they'd lived for generations. And she read about the Redfeather family specifically. Jim's grandmother had been 8 years old when soldiers came and forced them off this land. They'd walked away with nothing but what they could carry. The cabin, this cabin where Nelda now sat, had been given to a white settler within a month. That settler had sold it 2 years later. It had changed hands a dozen times since then, each sale washing away a little more of the truth. Jim's family had tried to get it back in the 1970s. They'd been told they had no case, that too much time had passed, that the law was clear. Now apparently things had changed. Now there were lawyers willing to fight and legal arguments that might actually work. Nelda looked around the cabin, at the roof she'd repaired. The walls she'd reinforced, the window frames she'd carved, the fireplace she'd cleaned and restored. Every bit of it was better than when she'd arrived. She'd brought this place back to life, but it wasn't her place to bring back. It never had been. She thought about what Teresa had said, 90 days to vacate. She could fight it, probably drag the legal battle out for a year or more. She'd lose eventually. Teresa was right about that, but she could make it difficult. She could hold on to this place a little longer, or she could do what Josephine couldn't. She could do the right thing, even if it broke her heart. The next morning, Nelda drove into town and stopped at the general store. Faye was behind the counter sorting inventory. "Nelda, good to see you. Need supplies? Actually, I need advice. Legal advice if you know anyone." "What happened?" Nelda explained the situation. Faye listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious. "That's a hell of a thing," she said, when Nelda finished. "Those poor people, fighting for what's theirs after all this time." "I know. That's what makes this so hard. What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, just on principle. I bought this property legally. I didn't steal it, but someone did. And you're benefiting from that theft, whether you meant to or not." Nelda nodded miserably. "I know," Faye studied her. "What would feel right to you? Not what the law says, not what you can get away with. What would let you sleep at night?" That was the question, wasn't it? Nelda thought about Josephine's words. "I tried to be brave and found I was only selfish after all. I need to give it back," she said quietly. "But I don't know how to do that without losing everything I've worked for." "Maybe you can't. Maybe sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. That's not very comforting." "No," Faye agreed. "But it's honest." Nelda drove back to the cabin slowly, thinking. When she arrived, Jim Redfeather's truck was parked in the clearing. He stood by the porch, looking up at the roof. "Hope you don't mind," he called. "I knocked, but no one answered. Thought I'd wait." "It's fine." Nelda climbed out of her car. Ghost bounded over to greet her, then cautiously approached Jim to sniff his boots. Jim crouched down and let the dog smell his hand. "Good-looking dog. Yours?" "More like we're both strays who found each other." He straightened and looked at the cabin again. "You've done a lot of work here." "I have. Lawyer came to see you, I'm guessing." "Teresa?" "Yesterday. And now you hate me." Nelda shook her head. "No, I don't hate you. I'm angry and I'm hurt and I'm terrified of losing this place. But I don't hate you. For what it's worth, I didn't want it to go this way. When I came here before, I wasn't planning to make a claim. I just wanted to see it again. What changed? My daughter, Marie. She found Teresa through a native rights organization. Got the whole legal process started before I knew what was happening." He met Nelda's eyes. "I should have told you that day, given you a warning, but I didn't know if it would go anywhere, and I didn't want to worry you for nothing. It's going somewhere, though. Looks that way." They stood in silence for a moment. Finally, Nelda said, "Would you like to see inside? See what I've done with your grandmother's cabin?" Jim looked surprised but nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." She gave him the tour, showing him everything she'd repaired and rebuilt. He moved through the space slowly, running his hands over the walls, touching the restored fireplace, looking up at the solid roof. "My grandmother died when I was 12, he said, "but she told me stories about this place, about the sound the wind made through the eaves, about how the morning light came through the east window, about the view of the mountains from the porch." He turned to Nelda. "You brought it back." The way she described it, this is what it was supposed to be. "I didn't know," Nelda said. "When I bought it, when I started fixing it up, I didn't know I was walking in someone else's stolen footsteps. But now you do know. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Nelda spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Jim's question. What was she going to do about it? She had 90 days to decide, but the clock was already ticking. She could fight. Hire her own lawyer, challenge Teresa's claims, drag it through court. Maybe buy herself another year in this place. But eventually, she'd lose, and she'd lose broke and bitter, or she could walk away now. Pack up her tools, load Ghost into the car, drive away from 3 months of backbreaking work. Start over somewhere else? The thought made her physically ill, but there was a third option. It came to her on the 4th night. as she lay awake, listening to Ghost snoring at the foot of her cot. An option that Josephine had never considered. Maybe because it hadn't been available to a woman alone in 1929. An option that required courage of a different kind than she'd needed so far. The next morning, she called Teresa Wolfe. "Ms. Virell, have you made a decision?" "Not the one you're expecting. I'd like to meet with the Red Feather family." "All of them?" "Here at the cabin." A pause. "Why?" "Because I have a proposal, and they deserve to hear it in person." Teresa was silent for a moment. "I'll need to discuss this with my clients, but I'll call you back." 2 days later, Teresa called to confirm. The Red Feather family would come to the cabin the following Saturday. 3 generations: Jim, his daughter Marie, and Marie's son, Daniel. Nelda had less than a week to prepare, both the cabin and her pitch. She worked with frantic energy, finishing the interior walls, installing the last window, making the place as presentable as possible. Not to impress them exactly, but to show them what their family home could be. What it had been once. What it could be again. She also spent hours drafting and redrafting her proposal. She filled pages in her notebook, crossing out and rewriting, until her hand cramped. She called Faye, who listened patiently and offered suggestions. She even called David, who was surprised but supportive. "Mom, are you sure about this? You're giving up a lot." "I'm not giving up anything that was really mine to begin with. I'm trying to do something right. Something that honors what this place actually is." "I think that's brave." "Scary as hell, but brave." The night before the meeting, Sharon called. She'd left Brad and was staying with a friend. Her voice sounded raw, but also lighter somehow. "I've been thinking about you constantly," Sharon said. "About what you did?" "Leaving Dad, starting over, not caring what anyone thought. I cared. I just did it anyway. That's what I'm trying to learn. How to do the scary thing even when you care what people think." A pause. "How's the cabin coming?" "It's almost done. At least the major work is." "But Sharon, something's happened." She explained about the Red Feather family, about the legal claim, about her plan. Sharon was quiet for a long time after she finished. "So you might lose it, after everything you've done." "I'm choosing to give it back." "There's a difference. I don't understand." "You could fight this. Fighting isn't always the brave choice, honey. Sometimes the brave thing is knowing when to let go. You're not letting go. You're being taken advantage of." "No, I'm trying to make something good come from something stolen. I'm trying to be better than the history of this place." Another long silence. Then Sharon's voice, thick with tears. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. You know that." After they hung up, Nelda sat on the porch with Ghost and watched the sun set behind the mountains. This might be one of her last sunsets here. Depending on how tomorrow went, she might have to pack up and leave. The thought hurt worse than anything had hurt in a long time, but it also felt right. She'd learned over the past 3 months that the work itself mattered more than the ownership. She'd learned she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. She'd learned that home wasn't about having a deed with your name on it. It was about belonging to a place, and letting that place belong to its true history. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. Nelda was up early making coffee, trying to calm her nerves. She'd prepared what she wanted to say, but she didn't know how it would be received. They had every right to tell her no, to demand she leave, to want nothing to do with her or her proposal. At 10 o'clock, 2 vehicles pulled into the clearing. Teresa emerged from the first, professional as always. From the second truck came Jim, a woman about 40 who had to be Marie, and a young man in his 20s, Daniel. Nelda walked down from the porch to meet them. Ghost stayed close to her leg, uncertain about the visitors. "Thank you for coming," Nelda said. "I know this is strange, but I needed you to see this place, to see what I've done with it." Marie looked at the cabin with an expression Nelda couldn't read. She was tall like her father, with black hair pulled back in a braid. Her eyes were hard. "My father says you fixed it up." "I've tried. Would you like to come inside?" They followed her into the cabin. Nelda watched their faces as they took it in. The restored fireplace, the new walls, the hand-carved window frames, the solid roof overhead. Jim touched the stones of the fireplace reverently. Daniel walked to the east window and looked out at the mountains. My great-great-grandmother built that fireplace, Marie said quietly. My father told me about it. She carried the stones from the creek bed herself. I didn't know that, Nelda said, but I cleaned every stone by hand. They're beautiful. The craftsmanship is incredible. Marie turned to face her. Ms. Virell, I appreciate you inviting us here, but we didn't come for a tour. We came because you said you had a proposal. I do. Nelda took a breath. Please, sit down. They gathered around her makeshift table, the door on sawhorses that had served as her workspace for 3 months. Teresa pulled out a legal pad, ready to take notes. Jim looked curious but wary. Marie's face was unreadable. Daniel watched her with interest. First, I want you to know I've read the legal documents Teresa provided, Nelda began. I've done my own research. I understand your family's claim to this land is legitimate. More than legitimate, it's a matter of justice. This property was stolen from your ancestors. There's no other word for it. We're glad you see that, Teresa said. So you'll vacate voluntarily? I have a different idea, one that I hope you'll consider. Nelda pulled out the document she'd been working on, pages of handwritten notes that she'd stayed up late the night before organizing. I don't want to fight you for this land, but I also don't want to just walk away and have it sit empty again. So I'm proposing a partnership. Marie's eyebrows rose. A partnership? I transfer the deed to your family. The land goes back to its rightful owners. No legal battle, no court fees. Clean and clear. In return, you allow me to stay here as a caretaker. I'll continue the restoration work, maintain the property, and pay reasonable rent if you want. When the work is done, this place becomes part of your family's heritage again. Properly restored, documented, preserved, so you get to stay, Marie said, her voice sharp. That's convenient for you. I'm not asking for permanent ownership. I'm not even asking for long-term security. If you want me gone in a year, I'll go. If you want me gone tomorrow, I'll respect that. But this cabin, your family's cabin, it needs work. It needs someone who cares about it. Someone who's willing to put in the time and labor to make it what it once was. Why should we trust you? Marie asked. You're a white woman living in our stolen home. Why should we believe you want to help us? Because I've learned something about this place, about its history, and I've learned something about myself too. Nelda looked around at the cabin. A woman named Josephine Reed lived here in the 1920s. She discovered the same thing I did, that this land was taken unjustly. It broke her. She left because she couldn't bear the weight of that knowledge. I found her letters, her diary. I know what it cost her to walk away. She turned back to Marie. I don't want to be Josephine. I don't want to run away from the truth because it's uncomfortable. But I also don't want this place to fall back into ruin. Your great-great-grandmother built this cabin with her own hands. She made something beautiful here. I've been trying to honor that, even though I didn't know her story at first. Now I do know it, and I want to see it finished. I want to see this place restored to what it was meant to be. Not for my sake, but for hers. For your family. The room was silent. Jim was studying her face. Daniel looked thoughtful. Marie's expression had softened slightly, but she still looked skeptical. Teresa spoke up. This is highly unorthodox. I'd need to draft an entirely new set of agreements. I'm aware of that, Nelda said. I'm prepared to pay for the legal work. I'm prepared to sign whatever contracts make you comfortable. I'm prepared to have zero rights to this property beyond irrevocable permission to live here while I complete the restoration. And when it's done, Marie asked, when you've fixed everything, restored everything, then what? Then it's yours. Completely. You can do whatever you want with it. Turn it into a family gathering place, rent it out, sell it, let it sit empty. That's not my decision. My only goal is to finish what your great-great-grandmother started and what I've continued. To make this place whole again. Daniel spoke for the first time. What about documentation? The history. I have Josephine's letters and diary. They mention your family, talk about the seizure. I'll give you everything I've found. And if you're interested, I'd like to help document the full history of this place. Your family's story deserves to be told and preserved. Jim leaned back in his chair. You said you'd pay rent. If you want me to. I have some money from my divorce settlement. Not a lot, but enough. Or I can pay in labor, help with other properties, do whatever work you need done. I'm learning I'm pretty good with my hands. Marie stood and walked to the window. She stared out at the mountains for a long time. Everyone waited. Finally, she turned back. I need to see the rest. Show me what else you've done. Nelda gave them the full tour. She showed them every repair, every replacement, every improvement. She explained her process, her mistakes, her learning curve. She showed them the hand-carved window frames and explained the symbolism she'd chosen, rising suns for new beginnings. I didn't know about your family when I carved these, she said, but it feels right now. This place is getting a new beginning, a chance to be what it was always meant to be. They walked the property together. Jim pointed out where different buildings had once stood, a smokehouse, a small barn, a root cellar. Daniel took notes on his phone, clearly interested in the historical details. Marie remained mostly silent, observing everything. Back at the cabin, Marie finally spoke. We need to discuss this as a family, privately. Of course. I'll go for a walk. Take your time. Nelda left them in the cabin and walked down to the creek with Ghost. Her heart was pounding. She'd made her pitch. Now it was up to them. She sat on a fallen log and threw sticks for Ghost, trying not to think about packing up, leaving, starting over somewhere else. After what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes, Daniel appeared at the top of the path, waving her back. The family was gathered on the porch when she returned. Teresa stood to one side, her expression neutral. Jim gestured for Nelda to join them. We've talked it over, Marie said. We want to hear more specifics about this partnership. What exactly would the terms be? How long would you stay? What happens if we disagree about the work you're doing? Nelda's heart leaped. They were considering it. They hadn't said no. I'm open to whatever terms make you comfortable, she said. We can start with a trial period, 6 months maybe. You can check in regularly, approve any major changes I want to make. If at any point you're not satisfied, I'll leave. No questions, no legal battles, and the deed transfer would happen immediately. Teresa asked, as soon as the paperwork is ready. I want to be clear, I'm not holding the property hostage. The land goes back to your family, regardless of whether you accept my proposal to stay. Jim looked at his daughter. Marie? Marie studied Nelda for a long moment. Why are you really doing this? What's in it for you? Honestly, I need this, not the property, the work. I need to finish what I started. I need to prove to myself that I can see something through, that I can build something that matters. And I need to do it right. I can't do that if I'm building on stolen ground without acknowledging that. So this is my attempt to make something good out of something terrible. To take a historical wrong and not fix it, because you can't fix something like that, but at least not perpetuate it. Marie nodded slowly. We'll need time to think about this. To talk to a lawyer who represents our interests, not yours. To make sure we're protected. I understand completely, but Marie glanced at her father, then at Daniel, then back to Nelda. I think we're open to the idea. It's not what I expected when I started this process. I wanted to see you forced out, honestly. I wanted you to lose what my family lost. But that's just more pain, isn't it? More loss. Maybe there's a better way. I hope so, Nelda said quietly. Teresa cleared her throat. I'll need to draft preliminary agreements. This will take some time to structure properly. I have 90 days, Nelda said. Use whatever time you need. After they left, Nelda sat on the porch and let the tears come. She didn't know if they'd ultimately agree. She didn't know if this would work, but she'd done what she could. She'd offered something real, something honest. The rest was up to them. Ghost pressed against her side, warm and solid. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Whether this was one of her last sunsets here or the first of many more, it was beautiful. That had to be enough. 2 weeks passed with no word from the Red Feather family. Nelda continued working on the cabin, trying not to think about the possibility that they'd reject her proposal. She refinished the floor, installed shelving, started work on a proper kitchen area. Each task felt both essential and potentially pointless. She might be building all this for someone else, or for no one at all, if they decided to sell the property. Then, on a grey Tuesday morning, 3 vehicles pulled into the clearing. The Red Feather family had returned, and this time they'd brought more people. Jim emerged from the first truck with Marie and Daniel. From the second came an elderly man moving slowly with a cane, helped by a younger woman. The third vehicle was Teresa's sedan. Nelda wiped sawdust from her hands and walked out to meet them. Ghost stayed close, more confident now, but still wary of strangers. "Miss Virell," Jim called. "We wanted to come see the place again. We brought some other family members. Hope that's all right, of course. Please come in." The elderly man made his way slowly up the porch steps. Up close, Nelda could see he was probably in his 80s, his face deeply lined, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. He stopped at the threshold of the cabin and placed his hand on the doorframe. "Thomas Redfeather," Jim said. "My uncle. He's Jim too, but we call him Thomas to avoid confusion." "Thomas, this is Nelda Virell." Thomas didn't look at her. He was staring into the cabin with an expression that made Nelda's throat tight. "My father was born in this room," he said quietly. "Right there, by the fireplace. 1892, my grandmother told me about it. How the stones were still warm from the fire, how the morning light came through that window." He pointed to the east-facing window with Nelda's carved frame. "I'm sorry," Nelda said, "for what was taken from your family. I can't imagine—" "No, you can't." But his voice wasn't unkind. "But you've done something here. Jim told me. Said you brought it back. I've tried. Please come in. See for yourself." Thomas moved slowly through the cabin, touching walls, examining joints, running his fingers over the restored fireplace stones. The younger woman who'd helped him from the truck stayed close, his granddaughter, Nelda learned. Her name was Rachel. "The craftsmanship," Thomas said, testing a window. "This is good work. Real work, not just patching. I wanted to do it right. To honor what your family built." He turned to look at her finally. "Marie says you want to stay. To keep working, if your family will have me. But the land goes back to you either way. That's not conditional. Why would you do that? Give up property you bought? Because it was never really mine. And because," she paused, trying to find the right words, "because I found letters from another woman who lived here. Josephine Reed. She learned the truth about this place, and it destroyed her. She left because she couldn't bear the weight of that knowledge. I don't want to be her. I don't want to run from uncomfortable truths. I want to face them and try to make something better." Thomas studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded photograph protected in a plastic sleeve. "My father gave me this before he died. Wanted me to have it, to remember." He handed it to Nelda. The photograph was old, sepia-toned, showing a family standing in front of this very cabin. A man, a woman, 3 children. The cabin behind them looked new, the logs still light-colored, the chinking fresh. The family stood straight and proud, dressed in their best clothes for the photograph. "That's my great-grandmother," Thomas said, pointing to the woman. "She built that fireplace you restored, carried every stone. And that's my grandfather as a boy. He carved his initials under the porch. Did you find those?" "No, I didn't." "Southeast corner." "They're there. I checked when I was a boy, before we lost the place." He took the photograph back carefully. "This was their home. They made it with their own hands. Then the government came and took it because someone decided Indians didn't deserve to own land. That's what happened. No prettying it up, I know. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give it back. But work might." He looked around the cabin again. "You've done what my family couldn't. Brought it back to what it was. What it should be." Marie spoke up from where she'd been standing by the door. "We've talked it over, the whole family. And we've consulted with an elder from the tribe. He suggested something we hadn't considered." Teresa stepped forward with her briefcase. "We'd like to propose a modified agreement. The property transfers to the Redfeather family. That's non-negotiable. But instead of you staying as a tenant or caretaker, we'd like to establish a cultural heritage site. The cabin would be restored fully and opened for educational purposes, school visits, cultural programs, historical documentation." "And you want me involved in that?" Nelda asked. "We want you to complete the restoration," Daniel said, "under our direction, with our input. The cabin becomes part of our family's heritage, but it also becomes something more, a place where we can teach people about what happened here, about the removals, about survival, about coming home. There would be provisions for you to live here during the restoration period. Teresa continued. Probably a year, maybe 18 months, depending on how much work remains. You'd be compensated for materials, but not labor. That would be your contribution to the project. When the work is complete, you'd need to relocate, but you'd be acknowledged as the restoration craftsperson. Your work would be part of the site's story. Nelda's mind was racing. This was more than she'd hoped for. Not permanent, but purposeful. Not ownership, but partnership. I'd get to finish the work. If you agree to do it our way, Marie said. This isn't your project anymore. It's ours. We have specific things we want preserved, specific ways we want the story told. You'd need to listen to us, respect our wishes, defer to our knowledge. I can do that. I want to do that. Thomas moved to the fireplace and placed both hands on the stone mantel. My grandmother's name was Sarah Redfeather. Before they took her away, she scratched her name in one of these stones. I never got to see it. I was too young when we lost the place. Always wondered if it was still there. Nelda felt her heart clench. Would you like to look? We could look together. For the next hour, they examined every stone in the fireplace. Nelda brought out her strong worklight, and they studied each surface carefully. Finally, on a stone near the base on the left side, Rachel spotted it, faint scratches, barely visible after more than a century. SR 1888. Thomas traced the letters with one finger, his hand shaking. She was here. She made this. It's still here. No one spoke. The moment felt too large for words. This man was touching something his grandmother had made with her own hands, something that had survived seizure and abandonment and decades of neglect, something that proved she had existed, had built, had claimed this place as her own, before anyone could tell her she didn't have the right. Thank you, Thomas said finally, looking at Nelda, for finding this, for keeping it safe. I didn't know it was there, but I'm glad we found it together. Marie stepped forward, her face softer than Nelda had seen it. We want to accept your proposal, with modifications, with our terms, but we want you to stay and finish this. Yes, Nelda said immediately. Whatever terms you set, I just want to see it through. Teresa pulled out a thick folder. I've drafted preliminary agreements based on our family discussions. Nothing is final until everyone signs, but I'd like you to review these. Can I ask one question first? Nelda interrupted. Will the cabin be used? Will people come here, see it, learn from it? Or will it just be a museum no one visits? We'll use it, Daniel said. I've been talking to the tribal council about educational programs, bringing students out here, teaching our language and culture and history. This place could be the center of that. A living place, not just a memorial. Then yes. Whatever the terms are, yes. The signing took place on the porch 3 days later. Teresa had worked around the clock to finalize the agreements. The Redfeather family had consulted with their own attorney. Everything had been reviewed, revised, approved. Nelda sat at a folding table someone had brought, the legal documents spread in front of her. The autumn sun was warm on her shoulders. Ghost lay at her feet. Around her stood Jim, Marie, Daniel, Thomas, Rachel, and several other family members who'd driven up for the occasion. Before we sign, Marie said, I want to say something. Everyone turned to her. She looked at Nelda directly. When we started this process, I was angry. I wanted justice, but what I really wanted was revenge. I wanted to see you suffer like my ancestors suffered. I wanted you to lose something you loved, because that's what happened to my family. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. But my father reminded me that revenge isn't justice, and Thomas reminded me that our ancestors wouldn't want more pain, more loss. They'd want healing. They'd want their home restored and honored. They'd want something good to come from all this sorrow. Marie looked around at the cabin. You've given us that opportunity. You could have fought us in court. You could have dragged this out, made it expensive and ugly. Instead, you've offered us something we never expected. Partnership, respect, a way forward that honors both the truth and the possibility of something better. She stepped forward and extended her hand to Nelda. Thank you for hearing us, for seeing us, for doing the right thing, even when it cost you. Nelda stood and took Marie's hand. Thank you for letting me be part of this. for trusting me with your family's story." They signed the papers together. Teresa witnessed, made notes, organized everything into folders. The property deed transferred to the Red Feather Family Trust. The restoration agreement gave Nelda 12 months to complete the work, with regular check-ins and family approval required for major decisions. She'd pay nominal rent, $100 a month, and continue living in the cabin during the restoration period. When the last signature was in place, Thomas raised his hand. "I'd like to do a blessing, if that's all right with everyone." They gathered in a circle on the newly restored porch. Thomas spoke in his language first, words Nelda didn't understand but felt deeply. Then he switched to English. "This place has known sorrow. It has known theft and abandonment. It has known the weight of injustice. But today we bring it home. We restore what was taken. We honor those who came before. We thank those who helped us return." He looked at Nelda. "All of us, even those who came to this story by accident, even those who didn't know they were walking in stolen footsteps. We thank you for stopping when you learned the truth, for turning around, for helping us find our way home." After the ceremony, the family explored the property together. Jim showed Daniel where the barn had been. Thomas sat on the porch and told stories about his grandmother. Rachel took photographs, not for social media or documentation, just to have them. To remember this day, Nelda found herself standing with Marie near the creek. "You're wondering what happens after the 12 months, Marie said. "It wasn't a question." "A little," Nelda admitted. "You'll have to leave. This needs to be our family's space, our cultural center. We can't have a white woman living here permanently. It wouldn't be right." "I understand." "I do, but—" Marie picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed, turned it over in her hands. "But you'll always be part of this story. What you did here matters. The work you've done, the choice you made, that matters. We won't forget it. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, maybe not. You gave back what was stolen. That's rare. That's worth remembering." They walked back to the cabin together. The family was gathering for a meal. People had brought food, were setting up tables. Ghost was being fed treats by Rachel, his tail actually wagging for the first time since Nelda had met him. Daniel approached with his phone. "Would you mind if I took some photos? We're starting to document the restoration process. Your work should be part of that record." "Of course." She showed him through the cabin, explaining each repair, each decision. He took notes, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested in the technical details. He was studying architecture, he told her. Wanted to focus on indigenous building techniques, preservation of historical structures. "You're doing important work," Nelda said. "Making sure these stories aren't lost. That's the goal. We've lost so much already. Every building, every technique, every story that disappears. That's another piece of us erased. This cabin—" He looked around. "This is one piece we're getting back." As afternoon shifted toward evening, the family began preparing to leave. Thomas hugged Nelda, thanked her again. Jim shook her hand with genuine warmth. Even Marie smiled, a real smile, unguarded. "We'll be back in 2 weeks for the first check-in," Teresa said. "And Marie wants to come monthly to approve progress." "Is that workable?" "More than workable." "I'd like that." After everyone left, Nelda sat on the porch and watched the sun set. Ghost pressed against her leg. The legal documents sat inside, properly signed and filed. The cabin belonged to the Red Feather family now. She was a guest in their space, a temporary caretaker, a paid worker completing a job, and somehow that felt better than ownership ever had. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "Day 89, transferred the deed today. The land is home where it belongs. I'm staying to finish the work. This isn't my cabin anymore. It never really was. But I get to be part of its story. I get to help bring it back to life. I get to finish what Sarah Redfeather started and what Josephine couldn't complete. That's enough. That's more than enough." She looked up at the roof she'd repaired, at the windows she'd installed, at the porch where she sat. 12 more months of work. 12 more months in this place. Then she'd have to figure out what came next. But that was a problem for future Nelda. Tonight she had a home. She had work that mattered. She had a family. Not her blood family, but the Red Feathers who'd chosen to trust her, who believed she could finish this. She had Ghost, silent and loyal, at her side. She had proof that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, was its own reward. The stars came out one by one. The mountains went dark against the sky. Ghost's breathing was slow and steady. Inside the cabin, everything was quiet and solid and whole. Tomorrow she'd start on the kitchen renovation. Marie wanted it to reflect traditional designs, and Daniel was bringing reference materials. There was so much work left to do, but tonight she'd rest. She'd earned that much. Spring came to the Montana mountains like a promise kept. Snow melted from the peaks, filling the creek with rushing water. Wildflowers appeared in the meadow, lupine and Indian paintbrush and columbine. The cabin, now 6 months deeper into its restoration, looked nothing like the ruin Nelda had first encountered. She stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Ghost, healthy now, coat shining, still silent but content, sat at her feet. Behind her the cabin was warm and solid. The kitchen was finished, built to Marie's specifications with traditional design elements. The bedroom had proper walls and a real bed frame Nelda had built herself. The main room held furniture she'd crafted, a table, chairs, shelves lined with books and tools and the artifacts she'd found. Josephine's letters and diary sat in a place of honor, carefully preserved in archival boxes. They'd become part of the historical record, donated to the tribal archives, with copies kept here for educational purposes. A vehicle approached on the dirt road. Nelda smiled, recognizing the sound of Jim's truck. He'd started visiting weekly, bringing supplies, checking progress, but mostly just talking. They'd become friends, an unlikely pairing but genuine. Behind Jim's truck came another vehicle, Sharon's rental car. Her daughter had called yesterday to say she was coming up for the weekend, wanted to see the place again, wanted to help with the work. She'd finalized her divorce last month and was building a new life, finding her own strength. She and Nelda talked more now than they had in years, real conversations about real things. "Morning," Jim called as he climbed out. "Brought those light fixtures you asked about?" Marie found them at an estate sale, original 1920s style. "They're perfect." "Thank you." Sharon emerged from her car looking tired but smiling. She'd cut her hair short, was wearing work clothes instead of her usual polished outfits. "Mom, this place looks incredible." They embraced, held each other tight. "You look good, honey." "How are you doing?" "Better. Scared, but better. I found an apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. First time I've ever lived alone." "How does it feel?" "Lonely sometimes. Free other times. Both, I guess." Sharon looked at the cabin, at the mountains beyond. "I understand now why you came here. Why you needed this." The three of them spent the morning working together. Jim helped install the light fixtures. Sharon worked on sanding cabinet doors. Nelda continued building heritage markers to place around the property. Posts with information about the Red Feather family, about the history, about the forced removal and eventual return. At lunch, they sat on the porch, eating sandwiches Nelda had made. Ghost begged shamelessly for scraps from Sharon, who couldn't resist those silent, pleading eyes. "Daniel says the first school group is coming next month," Jim said. 20 kids from the reservation. They'll tour the cabin, learn about their heritage, hear their ancestors' stories. "I'll make sure everything is perfect," Nelda promised. "It already is." "You've done more than we hoped for." Sharon watched their easy rapport with curiosity. "Mom, what happens when the year is up? Where will you go?" Nelda had been thinking about that question for months. "I don't know yet. Maybe I'll find another project. Another place that needs work. You could come stay with me while you figure it out," Sharon offered. "My apartment's small, but there's a couch." "Thank you, sweetheart. I might take you up on that." Jim cleared his throat. "Or, and this is just an idea Marie and I have been discussing, you could stay involved with the Heritage Center. Not living here, but helping run programs, teaching workshops on traditional building techniques, that kind of thing. Paid position, if you're interested." Nelda looked at him in surprise. "Really? You know this place inside and out. You know its story. You know how to fix things, build things. Those are skills we need. Skills we want to pass on to our young people." He paused. "And you've earned our trust. That matters. I'd be honored. Truly." That afternoon, after Jim left and Sharon went into town for supplies, Nelda found herself alone with her thoughts and her journal. She sat at the handmade table and opened to a fresh page. Day 275. Spring has arrived, and with it, new possibilities. The cabin is nearly complete. Just finishing touches left. In 6 months, I'll move out and this place will belong fully to the Red Feather family. But I won't be saying goodbye. I'll still be part of the story, just in a different chapter. I've been thinking about Josephine lately. About how she left this place defeated, believing she'd failed. But she didn't fail. She tried. She built something beautiful, even if she couldn't keep it. Her letters survived to guide me. Her story survived to teach me. That's not failure, that's legacy. I came here broken, running from a life that had crushed me into nothing. I thought I was looking for solitude, for escape. But what I found was purpose, community, strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that home isn't about ownership, it's about belonging. It's about the work you do, the connections you build, the truth you're willing to face, Roger called last week. First time in 6 months. He heard from David about what I've been doing. He said it sounded crazy, said he was glad he wasn't around to see me embarrass myself. I laughed. Actually laughed, because he still doesn't understand. He measures success by what you own, what you control, what you can put your name on. He'll never understand that the greatest thing I've done in my life is something I gave away. A knock on the door interrupted her writing. She looked up to see Thomas standing on the porch, leaning on his cane. Rachel was with him, holding his arm. Thomas, what a wonderful surprise. Wanted to see it one more time before it gets too busy, he said, making his way inside slowly. Once those school groups start coming, it won't be the same. Would you like some tea? Coffee? Tea would be nice. Rachel helped me to that chair. Nelda made tea while Rachel helped her grandfather settle. When she brought the cups over, Thomas was running his hand along the table she'd built. Good joinery, he said. Traditional techniques. Where'd you learn this? From books, mostly. Trial and error. Your family's guidance. You have the hands for it. The patience. He sipped his tea. My grandmother would have liked you. She appreciated people who weren't afraid of hard work. I wish I could have known her. Known her story firsthand. You know it better than most. You live in the house she built. You touch the stones she carried. You've read about her struggles in those letters. In some ways, you know her better than I do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, birds sang in the trees. The creek burbled in the distance. Ghosts dozed in a patch of sunlight. I've been thinking, Thomas said eventually, about what happens to a place when it's abandoned. When the people who loved it are forced away. The buildings fall apart, yes, but something else is lost too. The stories, the meaning, the soul of the place. He looked at Nelda directly. You brought the soul back, not just the walls and roof, the soul. The sense that this place matters, that it was built with love, that it deserves to stand. That's what my grandmother would thank you for. Nelda felt tears prick her eyes. That means more than you know. I know you have to leave when the year is up, but you'll always be part of this place. Part of what saved it, he smiled. You and that silent dog of yours. After Thomas and Rachel left, Nelda walked through the cabin one more time, touching walls, checking joints, admiring the work she'd done. Every corner held a memory. The roof she'd repaired during that first storm. The foundation posts she'd replaced while still learning. The window frames she'd carved by hand. The fireplace with Sarah Redfeather's initials hidden in the stones. Sharon returned with groceries, and they cooked dinner together, a real meal in the finished kitchen. They talked about Sharon's new job, her new apartment, her new life. They talked about David, who was planning to visit in the summer with his kids. They talked about Jim, who'd invited them both to a family gathering next month. You've built something here, Mom, Sharon said as they cleaned up. Not just the cabin. A whole new life. New friends, new purpose, new you. Not new, just found. The me who was buried under 35 years of being what everyone else needed. Are you happy? Nelda thought about it. Yes, even knowing I have to leave, even with all the uncertainty about what comes next. Yes, I'm happy. Maybe for the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely happy. That night, after Sharon went to bed on the cot in the bedroom, Nelda sat on the porch with Ghost, and watched the stars emerge. The night was clear and cold and perfect. The cabin behind her was solid and warm, ready for its new life as a heritage center, a teaching place, a connection to history. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the divorce that had freed her, the cabin that had challenged her, the discovery of Josephine's letters that had taught her about courage and failure, the Red Feather family who taught her about justice and generosity, the work that had shown her what she was capable of. In 6 months, she'd pack up her tools and move on. She didn't know where she'd go or what she'd do next. But she wasn't afraid. She'd survived the hardest thing, facing herself honestly, doing the right thing when it cost everything, building something that mattered even though she couldn't keep it. Ghost's head rested heavy on her leg. The dog's trust, earned slowly over months, was one of her proudest achievements. She'd saved this animal, and in doing so had saved herself. What do you think, Ghost? Ready for the next adventure? The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Silent as always, but the message was clear. Wherever she went, Ghost would follow. Nelda looked out at the mountains, dark shapes against the starlit sky. She'd come here broken and alone, believing everyone was right about her, that she was too old, too weak, too scared to do anything meaningful. She'd proved them all wrong, including herself. The cabin would stand. The story would be told. The Red Feather family would gather here and teach their children about resilience and return. And somewhere in that story, there would be a chapter about a woman who'd stumbled into this place by accident and stayed long enough to help make it whole again. Not by owning it, by honoring it, by doing the work that mattered, even when, especially when, no one was watching. She closed her journal and went inside, Ghost at her heels. Tomorrow there'd be more work. More building, more learning, more becoming. But tonight, she'd sleep in the home she'd restored, surrounded by the proof that starting over was possible at any age, that the bravest thing you could do was choose yourself, even when everyone said it was too late, especially then,